Russia and Iran have entered a new phase of close cooperation as they've signed a declaration to overcome US sanctions, with ways and means to counter, mitigate and offset consequences of coercive measures. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff said that the postponement of US assistance for Kyiv can cause Ukraine to lose the war to Russia. Now, of course, both fronts have had different kind of developments on their end. To discuss matters further, we are joined by Mr. Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. Welcome on board, sir.
Good day. Thank you, and thank your viewers.
Professor Lucas, let's start with this. Talk to us about the implications and the impact of growing Russia-Iran relations. We already know they have been fairly strong in the past as well, given the kind of military backup that Russia has received from Iran. How can they counter and mitigate Western sanctions by this declaration that they've just issued?
Well, I think Russia-Iran relations have been significant during Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the military front. I think most importantly, Iran has supplied many hundreds, indeed thousands, of attack drones, which Russia has used to assault Ukraine on a daily basis to try to break its infrastructure and to hit civilian areas. In terms of the economic cooperation, that's actually a lot more limited. You know, I can remember years ago that the Iranians declared that Russia would soon be giving them a $5 billion loan during the ongoing period of economic problems for the regime. That money never arrived. I know that Russia and Iran have declared for years they're going to enter de-dollarization, where the ruble can be exchanged directly for the Iranian toman and rial. That hasn't happened. So I think the declaration that was made yesterday, you know, it's political symbolism. It's the Russians trying to declare, look, we have a friend somewhere, because they have very few friends in the world 22 months into the invasion. And it's the Iranians, who also face ongoing economic issues, ongoing political issues, declaring, oh, look, we can always rely on Moscow to get us out of a jam, when the fact is that the leadership still faces a lot of public discontent.
Professor Lucas, now, as far as the friends are concerned for Russia, of course, Iran is one that we've just mentioned. There is North Korea, which we cannot avoid or ignore. Of course, China is again in the running. And are we seeing a trend of diminishing impact of Western sanctions, especially if we look at North Korea, Iran and Russia?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the political front. Yes, North Korea, I think you can argue, is a staunch ally of Russia. Again, has provided artillery shells and other munitions when Russia's running short of them on the battlefield. China is a much more ambiguous case. Indeed, I would argue actually that China is not closely allied with Moscow and has moved away from it. If you go back to the spring of last year, this past spring, when China declared it has a strategic relationship with Russia, but it also has a strategic relationship with Ukraine. China refusing, balking at giving military assistance, significant military assistance to the Russians, after they were warned by the United States not to do so. I think if you look at a case like India, which you know quite well, India also takes up a much more ambiguous position. India is quite happy, has been happy to take cheap oil, Russian oil for its own domestic economy. But in terms of political support, India very clearly sitting on its hands. On the one side, it will not support sanctions. It will not support the Ukrainian military measures to, keep Russia at bay. On the other hand, it will not go all out in supporting Moscow's invasion. If you want me to tick off the friends that Russia has, the clear friends that you could talk about, Iran, North Korea, neighboring Belarus, and that's pretty much it right now. If you're to ask me economically about the effect of the sanctions, I think we have to start with a misconception. And the misconception from the start, when the sanctions were announced within weeks of the Russian invasion in February 2022, was it was an all or nothing thing. Either they were not going to work, or they were going to work and they were going to collapse not just the Russian economy, but the Russian leadership. Sanctions don't work that way. It's not an all or nothing situation. The goal of the sanctions was to limit Russia's ability to wage ongoing war against Ukraine if Ukraine survived the initial assault, which it did when the Russians failed to take Kyiv. And the sanctions have achieved that purpose. They have created significant disruption to the Russian manufacturing base, especially the military manufacturing base. which has hindered the world's second largest military from being able to complete its conquest. What the sanctions have not done, and indeed this is not what sanctions do, is collapse the Russian regime, or Russian government if you prefer. You can take a case not only like Russia, but you mentioned Iran and North Korea. Sanctions in very few cases on their own can topple a government, because you need to have a mass movement by people, in this case inside Russia, to say that Vladimir Putin might go. And so far, Vladimir Putin still maintains his grip on the Russian security services and on a Russian system of repression that can limit dissent within the country. So being realistic about sanctions, no, they're not going to lead to the defeat of Putin personally, but they are going to continue to ensure that Ukraine is not defeated by Putin. Indeed, that Putin has not succeeded in his attempt to suppress Kyiv.
Now, as far as defeating Ukraine is concerned, that leads me on to the next point here as well. And, as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned, as India has made it absolutely clear that this is not the era of war, and to get all nations across the world onto the same page on the G20 was a clear sign of what India stands for. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war, the postponement of US assistance for Kyiv being debated in Congress, it would create a big risk for Ukraine losing the war with Russia. Now, this has been a statement which has come in from the Ukrainian front. Is it just a game of who holds on longer before the other side backs off when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, you feel?
Well, let me start with your interesting point about being against war. I mean, if the Indian government is against war, and I'm just speaking personally as well as an analyst, then it should be very clear with Russia that it should not have carried out this war in the first place, that it opposes this war. It should call this what it is, which is an invasion. When you say you oppose war, but you in fact do not oppose an aggression against a neighboring country, in this case, it happened to be Russia against Ukraine. You could talk about the ongoing situation between Israel and Gaza right now. When you don't do that, you enable that war. Russia can say, look, India doesn't oppose us. We can go ahead and carry out what has not only been bombing, not only been ground assaults, but war crimes. If you talk about what's happening in the United States right now, it's a similar type of politics. There's a core of hard-right Republicans and Trumpists who, under the guise of saying, oh, we just don't think there should be involvement in this war, are holding aid to Ukraine hostage. They did this initially in the House back in October when they forced out their own speaker, the Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy, with the condition that Ukraine aid not be passed then. 2 months later, they are still holding out against passing aid to Ukraine. The Biden administration's asked for authorization to spend up to $60 billion in forthcoming months. And significantly yesterday, not only the House Republicans, but the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell actually called for further delay. Let's be honest here. The biggest threat right now, I think, to the security of Ukraine, in other words, the biggest ally of Vladimir Putin's aggression, is probably not Iran. It's not North Korea. It is that group of Americans, American politicians, who are playing politics with, for the sake of their own careers, any assistance to Ukraine. And those American politicians who are the biggest threat to Ukraine, who are the biggest allies of Vladimir Putin, of course, they'll include a guy named Donald Trump, who's trying to get back into the White House.
Now, as far as the war is concerned, of course, the developments are coming in still, and Ukraine definitely needs US assistance, which makes it clear that without US assistance, there is no war which moves forward. Of course, these are two different varying opinions coming from both the sides. One is a Russian opinion of how they see it. Of course, it is seen as an invasion. There is no doubt in that. As far as the war is concerned, it becomes when there is US assistance at the back. And it is not an era of war, and that is something that every nation definitely stands with. And it's not enabling that. I stick to my point, you stick to yours. Thank you so much for joining in, Professor Lucas. Always a pleasure to have a word with you.
Thank you.